Like thousands of Australians who turned their backs on pandemic-weary cities over the past 2 years, Caitlin Wilson and husband Jonathan Pitfield moved to regional NSW to escape the rat race. They had no idea that the competition for childcare in bucolic Uralla, near Armidale in the state's northeast, would be fiercer than in the cosmopolitan confines of Chippendale, in inner Sydney. Both Caitlin and Jonathan work full-time and want Matilda, 18 months, and Harrison, 3, in long day care 5 days a week. I put our kids' names down at maybe 4 different day care centers and couldn't get anything, not a single day, until February. So, 6 months wait, Caitlin says. Then from February, the family managed to get 3 days child care, but in 2 different towns, 25 minutes apart. I really thought, to be honest, and I guess, this was naive of me, but I did think, when we were planning on moving to Armidale, that it would be easier to get childcare. There's just so many people, and such a long wait list in Sydney. But in the scheme of things, it was heaps easier in Sydney, she says. In Armidale, I'm asking every week, has anyone dropped out? Has anyone dropped out? And they've said, no, basically, we're not going to be able to give you another day unless someone leaves. So, until next year. Jonathan Pitfield and Caitlin Wilson, with their children Harrison, 3, and Matilda, 18 months. Caitlin and Jonathan are among more than 1 in 3 Australians living in a childcare desert, according to the first ever project mapping childcare availability in every neighbourhood in Australia. In Armidale, 3.3 children compete for each available place, on average. Out of 53 neighbourhoods, 46 are classified as childcare deserts, meaning there are more than 3 times as many children as childcare places. The data from the Mitchell Institute for Education and Health Policy at Victoria University, supplied exclusively to the ABC, found stark geographical divides in access to childcare. The project was partially funded by the Minderoo Foundation as part of the Thrive by 5 initiative. Childcare is critical to women's employment. This, in turn, drives economic growth, boosts financial security, and improves social and health outcomes for women and families. The key finding is that where you live matters when it comes to access to childcare, says Peter Hurley, a Mitchell Institute Education Policy Fellow and lead author of the report. People from higher socioeconomic areas, who have greater advantage, have the best access to childcare, and this happens more often in early learning than at any other stage in the education system. About 35% of the population, or 9 million people, live in childcare deserts. That's more than 1 in 3 Australians. This includes 1.1 million Australians, more than 4% of the population, living in neighbourhoods with no child care available at all. At the opposite end of the spectrum, about 3.3 million people, or 12.7% of the population, live in childcare oases, defined in the study as a neighbourhood where fewer than 1.67 children compete for each available place. This is the equivalent of 3 days of child care per week. Childcare oases tend to be concentrated in wealthier, inner-city areas. Childcare deserts are concentrated in city outskirts and regional and remote areas, where people tend to have lower incomes, less education, and fewer social and economic resources. These maps point to a lot more than just childcare accessibility, says ANU demographer Liz Allen, who is not connected to the study. Childcare is this great equalizer in so many ways. Childcare can grant families the freedoms needed to participate in paid work. Childcare also helps bridge the gap when it comes to early learning and then the pathway through education, and that determines lifelong opportunities in Australia. Ensuring universal, affordable childcare is vital to untangling some of Australia's most stubborn and pressing demographic issues, Dr. Allen says. We like to think in Australia that we are equal and everyone gets a fair go. But these maps show that's not the case. Inequality starts before you get to school. It starts before you're even born. Sprawling deserts, scattered oases. The Mitchell Institute study compares supply and potential demand for center-based day care in 57,400 neighborhoods and 8,700 childcare centers. That's every registered childcare facility in every neighborhood in Australia. The researchers calculated the number of children per available childcare place based on the population aged 4 and younger, and whether the childcare center was within a 10-minute drive for metropolitan neighborhoods or a 20-minute drive for regional neighborhoods. The study examined where a family lives, rather than where they work. The median score was 2.63 children per place. Sydney. Sydney's childcare divide mirrors the so-called latte line, which cleaves the city diagonally into the haves, living close to the city and throughout the northwest, and the have-nots in the west and southwest. Childcare oases are concentrated near employment centers and in neighborhoods where people earn more, have higher levels of education and job qualification, and more social and economic resources. These areas also tend to have less cultural and linguistic diversity. In Australia, families who use childcare earn nearly 1.5 times more than families who do not, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Melbourne. Access to childcare in Melbourne follows a similar pattern to cultural and linguistic diversity. Childcare places and English language-only households are both concentrated in the city centre and southeast, and along the road, rail and tram networks that create a starfish pattern radiating from the city centre. People from non-English speaking backgrounds are more likely to live in multi-generational and multi-family households where unpaid, informal care is more readily available. Children in linguistically diverse households are 1/3 less likely to use care outside the home, whether formal or informal, than children from households that only speak English. Brisbane. Brisbane and southeast Queensland have long been the destination of choice for people migrating within Australia, especially young families. This may be part of the reason its childcare map tells a different story to other capital cities. Much of Brisbane enjoys good access to childcare. It also has less cultural and linguistic diversity than Sydney and Melbourne. Even so, childcare supply is more abundant in neighbourhoods north of the river, where people are more likely to only speak English at home. Children in homes where only English is spoken are 44% more likely to be in childcare than those where a language other than English is spoken, ABS data shows. Canberra. The ACT has, on average, some of the nation's highest levels of childcare access, education, and socio-economic advantage. But Canberra still has a marginalised fringe, visible in the city's far north and the northwest suburbs of Fraser, Dunlop and McGregor in the Belconnen district, which are childcare deserts. Families in these suburbs tend to have fewer job opportunities and commute longer distances to work. They often face more competition for childcare places and may have to travel further for childcare than families living closer to the city centre. Adelaide. South Australia is Australia's most rapidly ageing jurisdiction, and one of only 2 jurisdictions with a population plan to grow the population by boosting migration and fertility rates, and stemming population loss interstate. Adelaide is typical of Australia's major cities. Childcare supply is concentrated in the central business district and more affluent inner-city areas. But beyond the city centre, childcare oases transform quickly into desert. Pockets of access at the city outskirts coincide with greenfield sites hoping to attract and support working families. Hobart. Much of Tasmania is a childcare desert, with a few scattered oases found only in Hobart. Many Tasmanians leave the state for post-school education and training, with those who return often settling in Hobart, Dr. Allen says. As a result, Hobart's population are more likely to work in professional and highly-S occupations, which generates both the demand for childcare and the income to pay for it. In Australia, mothers with a university degree who have children under 5 are 20% more likely to use childcare than those without a degree. Western Australia is an outlier for a number of reasons. It has the worst childcare accessibility.